Gillian Wright is a former palliative care doctor. She's now part of the group Our Duty of Care, which opposes plans to legalise assisted suicide. Morning, Gillian.
Good morning. Thanks.
But why do you feel it's important that the law remains as it is then?
Thank you. Yes, I represent doctors across the UK who have huge sympathy for those at the end of life, but are really concerned, particularly for those who are the most vulnerable, that they might feel a pressure to take their own life. And therefore, we're absolutely clear that we want the law to remain the same and that we should not assist suicide. But we do campaign for improved palliative care. Esther Ranson's doctor's right. So much of palliative care is excellent. But one of the main problems is that people don't get access to that. 1 in 4 of patients across the UK don't get access to the palliative care that they need. And of course, we can understand that at times then they will be desperate.
We presumably have some evidence to look at from countries where legalised assisted dying is available to people. Do you see then is that people are choosing to end their lives because they feel that they're a burden, as you mentioned?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So Oregon would be a good example of that. So if you look at the data over many years in Oregon, they look at the reasons why people choose assisted suicide, and there are a number. So fear of dying or loss of dignity are reasons. But for about a half, on average, they cite feeling a burden as one of the reasons that they choose assisted suicide. So feeling a burden on caregivers. And we're so concerned that it would be a very natural thing for people to see the pressure on those who are looking after them, either their family or friends, or those in the NHS. This is the wrong intervention for our NHS, just at the wrong time. We need to provide better care. People cannot make a true choice when they don't get true care.
Esther Ranson says that those who are terminally ill and mentally sound should not have to suffer unbearably against their will. That's her words. Can you understand her point?
Absolutely. And what we would advocate for is that those patients should get the access to the best palliative care. There's so much we can do. Palliative care is not simply about physical pain relief, although that's really important. It's about helping with symptoms like breathlessness or nausea, but it's also about psychological support. So a huge amount of what palliative care doctors and nurses do is about helping people adjust to a terminal illness, to think through the implications, to help them live until they die. And it's so important that patients have and people have access to that, and also that their families have access to it as well, to support and understanding. And I guess one of our concerns is that that we see people change their minds, that people might feel desperate or sad or low, and that we see them change their perspectives, that they see that their life is worth living, and that they have time, that they have things that they want to do with the rest of their time. So we're so concerned for this being introduced in law because we see the problems in other countries, as you mentioned. For example, in Canada, it was brought in just for the terminally ill patients that Esther has mentioned, but then it was expanded really quickly to those who are chronically disabled, who have chronic physical illness, because there was an argument that their suffering is just as significant as those with terminal illness. And then actually it was extended to those with chronic mental illness. And it was only because of significant outcry for people, from psychiatrists within Canada and externally, that there's a pause on that now until 2027. But once you open the door, once you take away the safeguard that is the prohibition of killing of patients by doctors, then it's really dangerous, particularly those who are on the margins, those who are homeless, those who have chronic mental illness, those who have previous suicidal thoughts, those who are particularly marginalised, and we're concerned because those are the patients that are disadvantaged by this legislation.
I suppose really the key here is you mentioned improving palliative care. But we know that the NHS, we talk about it every week, it seems like on this show, the NHS is under a huge amount of strain and struggling to, find capacity. And we have an ageing population. Would we be able to offer this palliative care, this great palliative care that you talk about, to everyone who needs it?
Well, I do think it's a really important conversation to have of what are our priorities as a society. And actually, the hospice sector provides a huge service to our community. It provides a great deal of palliative care without the NHS funding it. So most hospices are only partly funded. So they actually offer a mixed funding model, and actually a real support to the NHS. And I think what we would want to see in palliative care is that much more support for that sector, and that there's plans to support particularly general practice. So I think it's a case of prioritising community health and palliative care in thinking about the big picture of how to support NHS.
Thanks very much for your time this morning, Gillian. That's Gillian Wright, who's a former palliative care doctor.